And yeah. Okay, go.
Good evening, everybody. Buonasera, I should say. This is the second round of the BK Talks that we're celebrating from the Palazzo Mora, the European Cultural Center in Venice, at the time of the Venice Biennale, which is happening just a few steps away from us. I am very happy today to bring the topic of architectural design dissemination to our BK Talks. This is something that I have designed together with Simona Galateo. Actually, Simona is going to be the moderator tonight. We met in Venice at the Biennale some years ago. And I'm very happy that today we will be developing ideas about how to curate and disseminate ideas about architecture. I started curating and doing exhibitions a long time ago. I'm an architect, but I have spent most of my life curating and editing magazines and doing exhibitions. I did maybe started in a, let's say, very much of a top-down way. I did this exhibition in Paris that I was appointed by the city to talk about 100 years of housing in the city at the Pavilions de l'Arsenal. It was an exhibition show, which it's nothing special. It was just a show. Later I moved to the Faculty of Architecture, where I work right now, and I started working for Venice at the White Factory, where we try to disseminate as much as we can of the things that we do and we produce with our students. So let's say that 30% of our agenda is to try to show the general public what is it that we do in different sorts of ways. And we produce these exhibitions that have moved in different places around the world and ended up being purchased in, let's say, a traditional way by the Centre Pompidou as part of their permanent collection. No? Then we try to still, as I said, produce and curate exhibitions, and which in the beginning were sort of, I would say, kind of more traditional. And there was a moment in which, as educators, decided that we didn't only want to show and bring the work that we were doing to a certain space, but what if we started also trying to engage with the general public in a much more direct way? And this is when this period of producing this kind of more interactive installations started happening. So we sort of learned how to do things. We ended up actually building up our own student work, our own one-to-one models in cities like this is the case of Eindhoven in the Netherlands, or the Shenzhen Biennale, where we'll actually bring our ideas about future housing so that the public would experiment what those ideas actually were. So in this, let's say, intention of bringing the public more and more into the kind of idea context. Is that wherever that biennial goes, it tries to transform the city and doing it, let's say, in an effective manner, in an active way. So, talking about the city center, talking about the matters of the city where the biennial was traveling from the biennial arrived. That is really clear. So that had a big impact in all the ideas and all the, our preconceptions of the city where we were actually operating. So we have really had a big impact in the city, and the city itself is very well planned. And we ended up with this kind of big shift which we organized the Biennial Biennial was not only implicating students as designers, as architects, but try to make the public let us know what is that they want of the Biennial activity. So from that work with the students, we moved to the concept of the city. We started mixing up people so that they would come to the city that they wanted. What is it that they wanted the idea to do for them? So I hope that today we have a chance, and we will be very, very Simona, that we have a chance to discuss what is the future of architectural or design dissemination beyond traditional formats of exhibition, curation, and photography. Simona, so I'm very happy again to be in Venice. We're talking about Venice. I'm going to give you the word. I'm also going to thank Lisa, Erika, Tino, Dick, and
thinking if they are still correct or not in to address contemporary issues and aspects. And on the other side, if all those biennials formats are still able to devise to understand and outline the commonality and for the one who is very satisfied with topics with current has not been addressed. How we live together 1 year after the pandemic. Just to give some few more hints to open our debate after the presentation, exhibitions have always been a in the present. Look at the future with visions and maybe proposals. Present discourse and issues and instigate new forms of practice. About architecture and design exhibition, for example, from an historical point of view, we can remember some really important events in the past which have changed also in customs and proposed new reflections and directions that point of view. I was thinking about even institutions that exhibition in our thinking about the first exhibition in Venice, but in our point of reference to the practices that we also done for the research about on the Biennial and Biennials exhibitions in the last decades, we saw also the explosion of these formats. Besides Venice, we have also Chicago, Istanbul, also practices of architecture, but also from for the research about architecture and design. On the Biennial and Triennials exhibitions in the last decades, we saw a sort of explosion of these formats. Besides Venice, we have also Chicago, Istanbul, Oslo, Columbus, Lisbon, and to name a few. But are they still a good way, a good medium, a good format to investigate urgent questions about the reality? The current Biennale explored the question how we live together, where that word together seems to be, after a year and a half of pandemic, a little bit pleonastic, since we were forced to stay together for a really long time. So the curatorial statement by Sarkis call architects, researchers, and also artists to explore contemporary issues, envisioning the future, but with a specific reference to architects, which are, in his words, which I'm reading because it's difficult to remember, architects can give more stimulating answer than those that politics has so far offered in much of the world.
they have the great ability to attract different actors and experts in the design and construction process. We as architects are concerned with giving shape to the space in which people are living together, and because we often imagine these environments differently from the social norms that dictate them. So he has really a lot of trust in architecture and architects, but we are here to discuss if this trust is well, reposed, or we can think about something else, about exhibitions and the contents, how the contents are shown in this exhibition and also research. However, nowadays contents are also rapidly disseminated and consumed, that they seem to have expired before even reach the exhibition venue. So how can we deal with this reality where everything is online and everything is ready to be consumed? When the exhibition remains open, then the contents maybe are, or at the same time, are everywhere just to be reached and something like this. This is another reason why we are talking about exhibition today. So these were a few thoughts just to start our debate later after your presentation. So now we can start with your presentation and statements. So you have each of you 5 minutes to explain your thoughts, your position about this topic. And feel free to start from one or another issue about the exhibition, contemporary exhibition, so related to more focused on the Biennale or more focused on a general point of view. Later we will discuss on the both topics. So I give the floor to Simona Galateo, which is the Dean of the Faculty of Architecture and Built Environment in Delft. In 2013, he became a partner with the American architect in Delft. He has realized different kind of projects from exhibition design, urban development, master plan, and so on. But I will let you absolutely well know. Please.
Yeah, thank you, Simona. And I think it's great that we have our BK talks. This is the discussion forum of our Faculty of Architecture in Delft here in Venice. A very special edition of our discussion platform. We had one yesterday, and it's great to have you as guests here in our live stream to our students and colleagues in Delft and all over the world. In fact, it's online. Javier asked me to give some impressions of this Biennale. I visited yesterday and today, and I could be very short in giving an impression. I am impressed, but I should probably say a little bit more. I started my visit of the Biennale with some, I think the right word is trepidations. I thought, is this not going to be very depressing? The challenges, the issues we face in the world have become so clear in the last couple of years. The climate crisis, growing scarcity of resources, that all very much connected to the growing urban inequality, which is directly related to our profession as architects and urbanists. So what will the Biennale bring? Because you can't solve it tomorrow. So I thought it could be depressing or maybe paralyzing if you see, and there's of course an incredible, beautiful amount of mapping, but if you see what is being mapped, you see how enormous the challenges are that we have to face. So that's one thing that at least you learn at the Biennale. But I think in the end, for me it was not paralyzing, because there are a lot of, and I think in that sense the Biennale for me was quite consistent, really focusing on the issue, on that main question, how will we live together? A lot of small projects and big ideas, but I think altogether they somehow indeed, at least to me, gave the impression that as designers, we can contribute. We probably cannot solve it all, but I think especially in let's say, number of ideas, the width, the wide breadth of the ideas show that we need many ideas, that we need a lot of designers, maybe a lot of architects together to contribute. And indeed, there was also a statement which I thought was very right. Of course, we made many mistakes in the past, but now, in this maybe new awareness, we can start addressing things in a different way. So I think there's also this positive note. And I think that also resonates with the discussion we had yesterday, amongst others with Leslie Locke, who's here in the audience. She made also, I think, a very beautiful statement that we have to see ourselves, architects, urbanists, as translators. That we translate what we see, what is shown very clearly in the Biennale as the big issues of the planet, that we translate that to, maybe to everyday life, to how we can live together. So, for me, it was really also inspiring to see this Biennale. And then maybe as a second thing, because the discussion also, how today, what is the meaning of an exhibition, of a Biennale? I think that maybe I'm old-fashioned, but we will have the discussion. We are talking about the physical world, and I think we should be able, as architects and thinkers, to show that in a physical way, with objects, with materials. And that's why I think an old-fashioned exhibition is still very valuable. And there were also quite a lot of contributions with an endless number of QR codes that you need to scan. If you would want to scan them all, you would need, I think, at least a month here at the Biennale. And for me, that's not an exhibition. I think the exhibition gives the opportunity to really talk about the physical world, because that's what we have to deal with.
I agree, and also I it's looking to research a topic. I think it's quite important not to have only on screen or something like this, but be inside with the physical part of yourself, just feeling also the space and the exhibition itself. I think it's and I think this exhibition, this Biennale, can reach the point somehow. Also this point.
I think so. And I think it also helps to let's say, curating the exhibition is very important. How you bring things together, because of course at home on our screen we can get an endless amount of information. But without that, maybe that consistency or I think so. I think it also helps to let's say, curating the exhibition is very important. How you bring things together, because of course at home on our screen we can get an endless amount of information. But without that, maybe that consistency or order that the exhibition can bring. And I think that's also why we learn much more from an exhibition than using Google.
Thank you. Now I will give the floor to Elisa Pasquale. Elisa is a designer and co-director of Studio Folder. The studio is working and is focused on cultural projects and also commercial projects, but also on investigation of autonomous researches, and working through a different range of outcomes, from data visualizations and design exhibitions and editorial products and a digital platform. And they were exhibited also during the Biennale in some other international exhibitions as well. So, please, Elisa.
Okay, thank you, Simona, for this introduction, and I'm very glad to be here to share my experience. I want to start saying I'm not an architect. I'm a designer. I'm a visual designer, and but with my studio, with the Studio Folder that I co-founded with Marco Ferrari in working a lot with architects and with architecture because we are a studio that can be defined as multidisciplinary because many of the projects we develop have different outcomes. As Simona was saying, we do develop. Sorry, this is going. Okay, sorry. Include editorial design, art direction, exhibition design, and so very many different outcomes that defines our studio as multidisciplinary and research-based. We, as well with other clients and with other realities, we like to work with museums and cultural institutions. One of the projects I would like to share with you today was initiated in the context of the 14th International Architecture Exhibition here at the Biennale in 2014 when it was directed by Rancolas. Italian Limes is a project that started from discovering that in 2008 the Italian government proclaimed a law about the moving border. So it meant for us understanding what the border was, because usually borders are not moving, and so understanding and discovering this law by the parliament was quite weird for us, and we started investigating this topic through two different outcomes. One was an installation on the glacier. That was the case study we took to develop our research. So the research project and also an interactive installation we developed inside the Arsenale explore the most remote alpine regions where national borders drift due to global warming and shrinking glaciers. This because of climate change, of course. So the project focused on the effects of the climate change and the consequent shifts of the watershed that is defining the border, the national borders of Italy, Austria, Switzerland and France, so the countries that are sharing the borders and defined by the Alps. So after discovering this, sorry, I have some problems with the. This is not clear. Okay. After discovering this law, and here you can see an example of the old state border, the one in red, and the new measured border, the one in the dotted blue line. We developed some sensors. Sorry. Okay. No. Yeah, so we decided to develop some sensors to measure the movement of the glacier and so of the border ourselves, because the military was doing this, it is doing this, but we also wanted to investigate this by exploring the glacier and installing this sensor on it, based measuring the movement following a grid made by this sensor with an extension of approximately 1 square kilometers. Here you can see some pictures of the expedition. And just to give you the scale of the glacier, that was quite huge. It was very difficult to go up there. At the same time, we developed a physical installation inside the venue at the Arsenale, in which the visitors could experience what we wanted to show. So we designed this drawing machine that the visitor could activate, and the real border was drawn on the map real time. So, of course, the physical installation was communicating with the sensors on the mountain, and the exact position was transmitted in the moment the visitor could wanted to have the real map in real time. Together with the drawing machine, there was also a display of some documents and showing the history of the border, and also like a physical model with a projection mapping. And very briefly, the second project that I would like to share is Kiruna Forever, a visual exploration in 5 acts. That is a cartographic and data visualization film on 2 channels, with a projection mapping on 1960s model of the city of Kiruna in northern Sweden. We developed the installation for ArtDes, the Sweden National Center for Architecture and Design in Stockholm. And the exhibition, curated by Carlos Mindes Carrasco, was about the ongoing relocation of the city of Kiruna and the histories of extraction, because the city is on the process of being relocated because of the mine that is causing a serious problem to the city. So we developed a 4K projection mapping on a 6x3 model, 6x3 meters model of Kiruna that was built in the 60s, designed in the 60s with a large vertical screens. We combined the projection mapping with a film as well. Because we wanted to expand and also augment the view on the city across the physical, environmental and economical domains as well. So we explored the topic through different journeys, through different scales, from the underground of the largest iron ore mine in the world, to global shipping routes, to the observation of the atmosphere of the Arctic. And this is the way we operate. So we start from one topic, one curiosity, sometimes one discovery, And we try to expand the topic, we try to research and study what does it mean to have discovered such a thing, or what does it mean to investigate starting from one simple real fact, from one reality, like the relocating of the city. What does it mean? What does it mean for the territory? What does it mean for the reindeers? As you see here, they change their routes because of the mine. And so in terms of ecology, in terms of impact, what does it mean for citizens to being relocated also? So we are talking about a territory with a lot of history, of course, the Sami culture and many others topics, of course, related. Just to close my my brief intervention, I wanted to talk about these two projects because they well represent the interest we as a studio have in exploring and investigating our society and the world we live in. So it was about understanding how we live together, starting from a simple discovery like the case of the moving border for Italian Limes, or a real situation like the location of the city for Kiruna. So exhibitions for us are indeed very interesting moments to explore and to reflect on, and are still the correct medium, in our opinion, to experiment and to address pressing issues. And in particular, these two projects I've shown are also very peculiar in the context, because the first one had a physical installation in a remote part of the Alps, so in a physical space, and also another physical space inside the Arsenale. And then it developed in many other venues, and also in the end we were lucky enough and able to realize also a book out of it with Columbia. But the second project, the one about Kiruna, was done in 2020, completely remotely. I mean, completely. We haven't been to Stockholm, we haven't been to the museum, we never visited the venue because of COVID, of course, and so we weren't able to travel there. And so what we did was a research. We were able to actually do it, but we've never seen the project in person. And also the opening happened virtually, so maybe it is also something we can talk about following also what Dick was saying about having exhibitions for real or only online.
But yes, the installation was there.
The installation was real, yes.
So basically you're using the exhibition like an occasion to research on a public like a laboratory, let's say, and then you are doing the research, and then on a parallel way you are doing also the installation in some different way, just connecting different places on the same device. But you're using mainly you're using the exhibition like as a research occasion, let's say, and just produce a particular installation in the place of the exhibition. So it's a sort of laboratory, let's say. I would say that way. Okay, thank you so much. Now I will give the floor to Martina Muzzi
She's a designer and a curator also. She's the curator of Geodesign exhibition in exhibition platform at the Design Academy in Eindhoven, and she exhibited among other institutions and museums also for the Biennial in Venice, the Vitra Museum, the Plus Museum in Hong Kong, and he used to work also with Joseph Grima, so a really large CV for a really young curator. So please.
Thank you, Simona.
Your thoughts.
I'm really happy to go after the presentation of one of these because I think there are some common points going through what I decided to present today. Looking at the reason why we're here and speaking about the value of exhibitions within different practice, I have to say my starting point is design. And I studied design, I studied industrial design, and then slowly I went through social design in the Design Academy in Eindhoven itself. And then I started working with Space Caviar, which is founded by Joseph Grima and Tomasz Freire, and that's where the collaboration started, and also my idea of design and exhibition started to form. What I brought today is this project, which is really dear to me, is the design exhibition platform of Design Academy. Ooh. Okay, now we go further. Okay. I decided to bring this contribution for the panel because indeed it's an exhibition platform which was launched by Design Academy Eindhoven in 2018 in occasion of the Dutch Design Week. So we are talking also a really temporary event that happens in the city of Eindhoven, and for a week, 10 days, the city changes, transforms under all the energies that Eindhoven created along the year and somehow blooms in that period. This exhibition is a collaboration between the Design Academy Eindhoven and the Venice Museum. So I have to say that it was also interesting to present it because the container of the final work, indeed in the form of exhibition, is a museum. A museum that has a really interesting architectural plan. It's basically interchange rooms and allows also to create different narratives, different stories. How the design exhibition platform started, I was invited by Joseph Grima, which is the creative director of the school, to develop a exhibition project that will look at how design can extend their horizons and how it can be embedded within questions that go from the scale of the geopolitics to the scale of our individual life in this planet. So it's indeed an exhibition series that takes every year a really specific thematic, and that's also why I liked your way of pointing this out, Elisa, because it starts from a really specific theme and invites usually non-designers to investigate even more specific themes within the thematic of the show. The first one was on Alibaba, the online platform, e-commerce platform, Chinese e-commerce platform that we all know because indeed we all potentially have been purchasing from the website, but also from the sub-websites that could be Taobao, or Taobao is more Chinese oriented, sorry, I think we didn't, but for example from AliExpress. And it's becoming, it was 2018, it was the first episode we did, and it's interesting because designers were asked to investigate, starting from a journalistic approach, what it means to design within new forms of economies. Economies that are able, or platform, digital platform, that are able not only to transform the way how we purchase and experience product, but also the product themselves, but also the relationship between the online infrastructure of the internet and the urban infrastructure. For example, if we look at how Chinese countryside through Alibaba could reach the global market by the implementation of the internet infrastructure and the road infrastructure. So I'm gonna go fast between the image. Oh no, I wrote below in the slides, I don't know how the public sees it, but the designers that participated, so the project that you will see in the bottom, there is the designers that developed it, and the name of the exhibition to which it refers. Another point that maybe is interesting to make in order to have like a rich conversation later is the idea of format and the idea of what it means exhibition also for designers. Sometimes we see, let's say, design somehow also serving the market of design, what it is. This is an exhibition that somehow shaped up with this meaning in a way that what is presented is a research-based project, which means most of the time a process of investigation. But also it has as a final goal the exhibition itself, which means that the designers that participate, they are all alumni of the Design Academy and Dover, which means we are all a community, so the starting ground is similar. They have the possibility to think at the exhibition as the final goal. There is not intermediary of, for example, exhibition design or the exhibition display. There is not an exhibition designer. The designer is the researcher, the voice sometimes, or even the guest. For example, here we have on the screen Erbi Chen. She's an influencer on different social platforms in China, selling products that you can also purchase on Alibaba. She flew from Shanghai to make her studio in the museum for a couple of days. The second episode was the topic of junk, and it's interesting to say because this platform looks at thematics that are somehow urgent. So I think it's interesting in looking at the Biennale, how do we respond to urgencies and how fast are we? And this way of curating is basically more than finding solution. There is something that was said before. It's not. It's mostly understanding the ground and the process, but also the agents. And an exhibition has junk is that somehow also shift the starting point of observation almost from the end of the process of something that is discarded or potentially considered as trash. This is an interesting project by Shahar Levne that looks at which new territories, like for example the Garden patch in our oceans, are indeed created by junk. So it has also this idea of looking at the others in terms of other forms of life, or other technologies that are more or less understood by us in other languages. But also new forms of media that somehow mediate. So look at the QR code as a mediator more than emptiness, I would say. The second episode, it jumped in the city also, so it tried to occupy the shops in order that those specific topics, they could also reach other forms of I don't want to say market, but other forms of presence within the city economies. This is the case in a bank in Eindhoven. The third one was about sand. This was developed during the pandemic, so it has a totally different vibe. And takes one of the second most resource on planet Earth as a departure. So the project went from the really specific scale of the grain to the scale of policy. There are no policies that regulate, for example, sand extraction or distribution between countries. I'm happy that this is the last slide, so I will stop here. I was happy to bring this as one of the work I do, but I think it has several potential departure points for the conversation later. Exactly looking at format, the meaning of making exhibition, and also the role between the curator and the designers, which is something really important in my, at least in the way how I see my potential, like growing practice, hopefully, of curator and of research, and also the question of responding to urgencies and which position we take as designers in this case. But also the position of this collaboration between two institutions is also really valid in a way as a point. So I think the word in the next point. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. And yes, I think we will go back in our discussion later between this approach just to dedicate some space and research for processes instead of the final product of something which could be sort of on design or architecture. So I think this it's quite evident also in the last Biennale here in Venice. You know, it's more interesting today because thinking about the process and not exactly on the final product. So maybe this kind of research, this kind of way to research the main topic of the contemporary issues, I think it's could be also our topic for our debate a little bit later. So I will give the floor to Erika Petrillo, and she's a writer, a curator. She currently works for 2050 plus. The studio is part of the curatorial team of the Russian pavilion here in the Biennale, which received this year the special mention from the jury. And she has collaborated with international institutions like MoMA, Biennale, and the Venice Academy in Maastricht. So please tell us about your opinion on exhibitions.
Thank you, Simona. Thank you for this lovely invitation. I have no slides like me, so I'm here, as Simona mentioned, on behalf or as a spokesperson for 2050 Plus, which is an architectural studio, research studio, truly interdisciplinary at its core. The studio was founded, I want to say, 2 years back now, by Ippolito Pessimila-Parelli, and it's a studio that looks at design as a key to address issues around the environment, politics, and technology. Among the multiple things that we do, one of the most recent one was curating the Russian pavilion here in Venice. And so now we will try to address the question that this panel is posing from the specific lens of the Biennial in Venice. Even though, of course, we have seen that there are multiple ways of addressing it. So perhaps like a word as a foreword is necessary, and it's a qualification about how I personally interpret the value of exhibition, and I guess this is in line very much with the view that the studio has. So I come from a background in political philosophy. I don't know if that's the reason really, but I look at exhibitions not so much or not at all as boxes in which to display objects that might have allegedly a sort of aesthetic value of a sort. I look at exhibition spaces as venues that should activate some kind of reflection, as venues where people and ideas can meet, so as venues for encounters, and also sometimes clashes, because of course frictions are also parts of encounters sometimes. And so if this is the sort of premise of my view on exhibitions, and if now the gaze for which I will address the question of the relevance of exhibition is that of the biennial, I think the question can be reframed as to what extent the biennial in Venice accommodates for this kind of meaningful encounters, meaningful discussions. And I want to say that in its very infrastructure, the biennial has a few flaws that make these kind of encounters, I want to say, a little bit difficult sometimes. So one issue, which I think is quite crucial, is the issue related to the temporalities, the chronologies according to which the biennial function. The Biennial of Venice, the name says it itself, takes place every 2 years. And this chronology, which is a fruit of the past, is a fruit of the very nature, the very reason why the biennial came to be, when back in the days, 1 century ago, it had kind of made sense to want to exhibit certain things every 2 years because the pace of life was different. Somehow now doesn't really function anymore, seems to be a little bit obsolete. This is because this chronology, 2 years chronology, is too stretched to be able to react in a timely manner to the most urgent issues that we face daily. So on the one hand, the temporality according to which the biennial function seems to be too stretched, but also on the other hand perhaps is not stretched enough, because if we look at other models of international art exhibitions, such as for example the sculpture project in Munster, which takes place every 10 years, we see that in that case there is a time indeed to intervene meaningfully on the territory, to engage with the locality in a sensitive way, whereas it is not possible, perhaps intervening every 2 years to do this kind of operation and engagement with the territory. So it seems to be temporarily that it is a bit out of joint, a little bit out of sync with the tempo of our lives. Of course, there is the biennial, meaning not the curatorial team that is appointed every year to curate the thematic show, nor the curatorial teams that are appointed to curate the national pavilion, but there is a biennial as an institution that could be a guarantor of this kind of continuity. But perhaps without wanting to point fingers, but it seems that the biennial in the past years has kind of like give preference to other kind of engagements. So the biennial seems in recent years very much to be attuned to the spectacle of the biennial and to the mechanics that are related to mass tourism rather than that of meaningful engagement with the locality. So there is, I think, one issue which is related to the chronology of the biennial, which is perhaps a possible flaw to be discussed. And then there is another issue, which I think is that of the very structure of the biennial, which is based on the system of national pavilions. Again, this is a product of history. We all know that at the time when the biennial was founded, National Pavilion had a political function, because back then it was a time when nation states were developing their own existence, and so the idea of belonging to a nation state was still in its development, and together with the bureaucratic system of nation state, with the system of the education in the army, there was also this idea that art, design, architecture could play political role in forming this sense of national belonging. Nowadays, this system of representation seems, again, a little bit obsolete, because we have, on the one hand, intergovernmental organizations that are above the level of nation state, and we have also, on the other hand, grassroots organizations that don't have voice within the border, the conceptual border of nation states. And this is not just kind of like an issue that is interesting to speculate about, but I think it has very direct, very practical repercussion in the kind of issues that can be discussed within the biennial. Because if we are now repeating that exhibitions should be spaces for discussing timely and relevant issues, the timely and relevant issues of nowadays are issues that cannot be discussed within the border, both conceptual and geographical, of nation states. So if we talk about intersectionality, if we talk about climate justice, if we talk about spatial justice, if we talk about mass migrations, those are all issues that have a resonance that is planetary rather than local. And this is not to say, I think, that extremely localized issues shouldn't have space in the context of the biennial. On the contrary, I think that's the case, but only when extremely localized pieces of research, such as the one that Elisa, for example, mentioned before, can have reverberations that are interesting to discuss planetary issues. And this is, again, something that I don't think can easily happen within the context of national pavilions. And again, I think that if we are talking about nation states being represented in Venice in terms of national pavilions, we are talking about effectively almost as a representational system, almost as a political representational system, which in fact mirrors and validates some of the structural injustices that are present in the political system of nation states. So if at the international arena not all the states have the same value or weight or leverage, similarly not all the national pavilion have the same leverage. So it's very different to be participating in a national pavilion in Giardini. It's another thing to be participating in a national pavilion in Arsenale. Another thing is to have to scout every year for a venue that could accommodate a pavilion, a nation state that doesn't have a space in the Giardini and in Arsenale. So in this sort of like weird dysfunctional representational pyramid, of course, there are somehow pavilions of first and of second class, and this is obviously something that doesn't facilitate a fair and just conversation. And let alone, of course, also other types of aggregation that don't recognize themselves under the rubrics of nation states. There was a few weeks ago a very interesting panel that was organized by the Curators Collective, which was entitled The Missing Pavilions, which was talking about all these organizations, the Catalan Pavilion, the European Pavilion, they don't recognize themselves under the conceptual framework of a nation state. So the question is, how do we engage also all these partners in a dialogue that is truly engaging and inclusive? So I don't want to go over my time, but I guess those flows, so the chronology, so to say, that is out of sync, and the DNA that is the Biennial of Venice that is rooted in a system of national pavilion are for me and for my studio for 2050 plus some of the first questions that we try to address in curating the project of the Russian pavilion, which in fact try to put itself at the center of the conversation. So we try to turn the gaze inward towards the pavilion itself. We try to make the pavilion the object of the conversation, because without wanting to be self-referential, but we thought that without addressing these issues, it would have been difficult to kind of develop any other kind of form of conversational engagement. So, yeah, I'll stop it here for now.
Thank you, Erika. Yeah, and I think the Russian pavilion was one of the few pavilions which reacted to the pandemic situation as first, because you switched the exhibition, all the content of the exhibition directly online. So all the meetings, all the things were in some way just to follow all this strange period we were into it, and just to arrive to the final exhibition now this year, to open a place, actually, a place where it would be a sort of device to offer space for confrontations, and also to open some new kind of spaces also related to the virtual reality or the reality. So I think it's also why you maybe received the special mention, but here we have Leslie Longo, so we will ask her just later to explain a little bit more on the work that the jury did for the Biennale this year. So I give the floor to last but not least, as we say always, to Cino Zucchi. He's an architect actually, and chair professor in Polytechnic of Milan, but he was visiting professor. He has been visiting professor at the GSD in Harvard University, author of several articles and books, and he was the curator of the Italian pavilion here in Biennale in Venice in 2014, and also participate also to other Biennale here, other Biennale of architecture here, and also was the curator of several Biennale in Milano. And so just tell us your really long presentation.
Since I'm
Really
the
long, but
oldest and weakest, I prepare a machine gun presentation where bullets are images and quotations.
Okay.
This is not mine. That's not my presentation.
But this is the one of, no, this is the one of, just go.
Okay. Yeah. It's not mine.
It's still the button.
What?
It's
Click again.
Okay. So, going with what Manny said, starting from Dick, he said the body, the idea of the physical. I just remember a quotation from Eleonora Danca, the dancer, who said, "If I could write it, I would not dance it." Second quotation, and that's good, is by Carlo Molino, who says, "The meaning is not in the words, but in the accent." I would like to concentrate not on content of the exhibition, but the means. Okay, this is so. I will shoot a number of things. Indeed, of course, we will not explain them all. but what's happening?
I think it was
It's
for me.
confusion. It's this one.
Okay. Ah, this one, okay.
Yes.
Because this, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah. So I said, in an art exhibition, the Rothko Chapel, the body, I mean, the work is there. The problem with, and then in a way you have some artworks where organizing things, the art is not by producing something, but arranging. This is the famous Maus Museum and a Reagan wing by Plaisance, Oldenburg. I loved it, where picking up things, he looked at the relationship between just what is a gun and what is a, the end point of a form, is a shape, something what a kid could use, boom, boom, boom. So even artists arrange things and not necessarily produce them, but what I think, this is not the presentation I gave you. Okay, that's okay. Not the last thing. Sorry. I thought that when you do an architecture presentation, there's an old Greek word which is called ekphrasis, which means the description of an artwork in another artwork. The most famous one is from Iliad, when Homer describes the shield of Achilles, or maybe Ode to Grecianor, or things. So it means an art mean usually is literary over painting, but it could be the reverse. For example, Mussorgsky, the picture and exhibition is a piece of music referring to painting. So I think the key to understand architecture exhibition is this very old word. In a way that two arts confronting. And I remember this column in Lucca where a column as a body displays as its own ornamentation an arch. So it's in a way it's very Magritte-like. You have a real arch and then the arch representing itself. Many architecture in the Biennale going in a way with the risk of a loop, this kind of almost feedback. So when this is just from the last one, when you go by, I really predicted to read something you think, but this guy really wants to say this thing to me, or he wants just talk, no collateral effects like in a medicine commercial. I mean, I was serious, he wanted to give us all this information. But this sort of datascape or database, it's all aesthetic. Some people, they use banners. You use mixed means, physical models and things, just models, video displaying yourself, of course, installations. You see them all. This is one of the one I like the most, the Chilean pavilion. But that's the question of taste. But just to say that is the big choice between the Biennale is to tell a story or to enact something. And then when it comes to me, what the hell do you do when you have to do things like that? I just started many years ago in just doing what would say a traditional exhibition about Piero Bottoni was an architect, but just I needed to break a centralized church into some kind of line. So this is starting from extremely traditional exhibit designs which needed somehow to put a relationship between space and narration. Many times we are asked to do installation. This was dedicated, was a Biennale, to my friend Gustavo. He re-educates chimpanzees to the wildlife, it's called Lonely Living. And the idea was to make a mini space for a person living inside, and talking about the minimum space. I just go back quickly. I actually wanted to make birds flying there into the host, but then I thought they would never let me. But then again, with Stefano Boeghi many years ago, we were quite young, we were asked, Piazza Cadore Milano now is designed by Gauletti, to expand the Triennale into the city, and we made these very cheap budget totems, calling some graphics and also doing this theme, the symbol of Biennale, and the name of the show was Identity and Difference. So basically we invaded the city with these funny objects which were meant to bring people to the Triennale. And in a way, I think they opened the question to redesign Piazza Cadorna, because Piazza Cadorna was a big parking. So in a way, they open, sometimes you, as Simona said, the Biennale or even some site-specific installation pose the question of what to do with the space. They make you look the space in a different way. And then sometimes you call to an artist, somebody call me in the Maxi and say, do something. I say, I'm an architect, I work on program, I cannot do artwork. No, just do what you want. So this we had a 4 meters by 4 meters cube. I thought, we are in Rome, you know, the city of Bocomini. So it was a game about, was called the body of the city. I made an installation, maybe a sculpture, with the color of the liver. I actually went to the butcher to buy a liver, and I gave it as a sample, like a real liver, but then it got a bit rotten. But this, in a way, was just a space evoking Roman Baroque, but also like you're in a cell. And when I was young, there was this incredible, it's called Marvelous Journey, somebody going to a cell. And then you go walking, it was very low things. And then we had the Pantheon. It was again taking the Nordic plan, and we took the Pantheon as the heart and the city as a body. So all was a joke about all the metaphors of the city as an organism. They say splatter monumental, what to call it. Then Chipperfield called us to do a very small installation in a common ground, and thinking about the common ground, I was thinking about Dan Sperber. He wrote a book explaining culture, a naturalistic approach, about the epidemiology of idea and representation. This idea of a copycat, I call it, you know, somehow not idea finding form, but we metamorphosing in a mimetic way. So basically we did just big cardboard, big cupboards, and on the inside, they represented almost an Italian square where buildings look alike. This idea of like the brotherhood as, you know, the brother and sisters resembling each other. And on the outside, I put, half of it was my collection, my personal collection. I went to rob some insects in a Darwinistic approach to the Museum of Natural History. I went around and to picture faces of Milano. I went, these are Dutch photographers who go around and pick people, and you know, there's 12 Dick van Gammel and 12 Chinozuki. We think we're so original, but it was in a way a post against originality, this idea, be original. So remembering that formal culture, they have some kind of copycat mechanism, okay? So, and we made this pavement of little things. So the idea of a bodily experience to me is still not the only one, of course. We can write a lot, but somehow, you know, exhibit is not exhibit design, it's something, but most of the things move in a territorial state which is neither exhibit design nor art. That's what the Biennale is like. Okay. Then again, some more commercial thing. These people, they did do something about stone and about stairs, and we went really archaic, and we call it New Karnak. And we built a small stone installation which were something displacing scale. This was a small sketch about, you say, it's not the right presentation, but it's okay. So it was just, now that I did something in it. It basically was like something where it looked like a stair, but we had these very little elements which looked like a Greek temple or something. I go quickly. This is what Simona was mentioning. I had a very quick commission from the ministry, and they called me in December, said, Chinozuki, you want to be the curator of Italian Pavilion? I said, come on, it's, you know, everything is open in May or June, it's impossible. Then I took 3 days and I said yes to the ministry, and since Rem Koolhaas gave a very good suggestion about what it was 1914, 2014, absorbing modernity, Hajj country, my thought is that Italy had such a layered, let's say, soil that even modernity had to go through more complex strategies. You know, if you try to distinguish somehow some national character from Tehran or whatever, it's not a stylistic one, it's just dealing with a more complex territory. I go very quick, and we had. So I called it drafting, and I said, I have to do the first one. I asked the Soprintendente Monumenti, can I do it? And she said, yes. So I did this, we call it the archi-funnel, archimbuto, so it's something between an arch and something to suck people in. And it's still there, but it's interesting that in Italy everything is temporary, becomes permanent in this case. Now it is the entrance to the Biennale. the first part was just a big book showing that even the Campidoglio of Michelangelo is not original. This was the state before the Campidoglio. So everything in Italy grows on something else, okay? And it grafts in, in a fabric. So this idea of not being alone and piling up. And this is, when you have to design terrain in front of the Colosseum, Basilica of Asensio, you are a little bit embarrassment in respect to the paradigms of functionalism. Oterrani try to graft on medieval cloisters or Giotto. I go quickly. This is Venice, of course, which is the most challenging city of the moment. Just to say that we did this flow chart of temples or spaces, taking models of the city and overlay all the possible cities. This was Milano. The first part was Milano as the most, say, modern striving city in Italy, but also about the complexity of the construction after the bombing, possibly completely. The idea of what it means to do an urban skyscraper, to Velasca, Pirelli, and the latest skyscrapers. The second part was contemporary, let's say, young architects dealing with the landscape, and we had Matilde Cassani doing a small recipes where he asked people to see this very quickly, and Dick sent us the postcards. I asked some non-Italian architects to say, just send us a postcard, what you think. It's like seeing the Stephen Hall connecting, let's say, Manhattan to Milano as a like 50 years or something. And this is resting space. Okay, very quick. Then with Elisa and through the folder, we did this exposition always very quickly. We tried to focus together design, because I co-curated with Luisa Collina, and it was also about relationship with design architecture, going back even to Gottfried Semper. Half the people did not know who it was, of course. Seeing how techniques of production are not indifferent, but they leave a trace. So the idea that we took 4 categories of Gottfried Semper, just connecting, molding, and seeing how, let's say, and this is to me is very important. We design both the content and the physical space, and in a way, the stage set itself tried to mimic the idea that technology is not a mean, is somehow also a resonance between means and ends. So basically it was big courtyards, each one was weaving, and on the side you had object design on this center table, and say architects that treated weaving as a thing. It was quite interesting. Then Everyday Wonders. This is the craftsman architects who called me and said, Cino Zucchi, you want to do something either on yourself or this guy who you make us know is Caccio Domignoni. He died when he was 103. He was a totally unknown Milanese master and everybody's hype about it. So we did an installation about only one of his buildings. On the outside we left just things in Milano. We do just the big, the national cake is panettone, we say it is at this shape. But I gave this image to the people who do the stucco. So Caccio Domignoni was a very dandy guy, so the inside took this color of Caccio Domignoni building. This is a guy. He was almost an historicist when he had to deal with historical city, but quite modern. In a way, eclectic like Guizzo or others. And we put his original lamp in the middle, and it was an incredible zoom on the work, going to scale from 1 to 500 to the 1 to 5, zooming down to this building. I go quick, lamp. And this is what I just did in a month. Mapei, they do sealants, they say Cino Zucchi do Santi sono mobile, very commercial in this courtyard. And I remember that when I was a kid in '89, I did this book about Milanese courtyards, and I redrawn, these are my drawings, my China drawings, of all the courtyards in Milano, and I redrew the portal you saw. So instead of everybody's doing installation, making sculptures, it's a very commercial venue for the moment, and I said, why don't I start from there? I took the sculpture and I blew it up. So the concept is to do anamorphosis, something that, and taking the sculpture and dilating it 6 to 1. And this is the result. And Bramante and Sansartico compressed The end part is a fake perspective, the real perspective, but then the art does not exist, you see there. So we did the reverse, and this is photograph from three days ago. In a way, I have a sequence of photographs where from far away you cannot see it because it's compressed, and then as you go in, it just sticks in now. To finish up, this is actually a shop, it's a showroom where these people produce metals. I just wanted to show you because many times you have to enact, in this case, a commercial venue, and since these people produce metals, I did these quite sophisticated metal things, and I designed, let's say, different, the 12 different interchanging doors to put every month. So this was the first one, but every month they changed the door and then display a different metal. I designed a very sophisticated, handle because they are very good craftsmanship. So everything it embodies more than representing in a way, and then I designed this sort of, bollards. And going back to the first image, I think that the idea of being able to represent a content which is non-architectural, geographic, through our thing, because where's the point where we become just social activists? We can make a long history of architects as social activists. I'm not saying you're an architect, do just architecture. I'm saying that a political film is not necessarily a good film. Ken Loach can do a good film or not. So when we say we are political, this is in general a problem of engaged art. So I took this last quotation, which is meaning a physiognomy by I hope you feel this way.
Thank you so much, Gino. So we can start our debate. We have, not so we will have 10, 15 minutes, I think, and then I would like to ask also to Leslie to intervene with some questions and so. I think after hearing all your presentation, we can be sure that we all agree that the exhibition has steered the culture and has steered the main device to explore some issues of contemporary reality and environment. And I think also that we can consider them as a site to propose some new point of view on the reality, just to stress a bit some questions, some urgent questions. One of them, so I think we can agree all of them, also thinking about your presentation. But just to give you some questions, I think one of the main critiques to the current Biennale is that architects were called to do some art installation, let's say some installation, just like cliche, more closely to arts than to architecture itself. But the art installation for real, so the installation made by artists, were more effective than the ones just produced from the artists. So I was thinking, all of your researches just exhibited in this place in these exhibitions are between the installation, between the research and the installation. So I was thinking, what do you think about this device, how to use it, and where is architecture in this kind of field? And the other question was for Erika, actually, because here we have one of the person of the curatorial team of the Russian Pavilion. So I would like to ask you to explain a little bit more on the curatorial statement of the pavilion. But first, I would like to push you to react to each other presentation, just thinking about this this issue. So, Chino or
No, maybe it's related, but the question that came up in my mind during the presentations, which was not really addressed for whom are we making the exhibition?
This was my question. Where is the public?
Yeah.
Who is the public?
Because I hear, let's say, some statements that it's really more a kind of activism, that you want to connect, let's say, you want a specific group to participate, to be part of the exhibition, and maybe even a comment that Biennale is not doing that. So yeah, it's an open question. I don't have the answer, but maybe Chino, who do you want to reach?
I
If you make an
think
exhibition.
today the issue of media in general, after Walter Benjamin writing the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, which is still, and Umberto Eco writing Apocalittici Integrati, 1964, fundamental, he talks about the relationship between kitsch and art. In a way, he points out the avant-garde needed the slogan, but also commercial needs the slogan. I'm new, I'm different is something common to the avant-garde and to Kellogg's cornflakes. So he was talking about the new condition of the avant-garde and the talk of the avant-garde who tries to be somehow new or hermetic to get away from commercial art, but commercial art's always chasing after. I have a friend, Peter Arnell, he's a advertisement guy. He goes to the Old Biennale, and 6 months after, to make the advertisement of whatever, you see Bill Viola or Surrounded Only by Cristo, you see a continuous, let's say, drift from the Biennale to commercial art. This is in a given, it's a continuous suck, because you can, once you make the techniques of contemporary art, they diffuse. And today, even with the big fashion world, Prada, institution that, you don't see what, can we have an avant-garde today? I'm not sure. Is the same meaning they could have in 1920, because to have an avant-garde you need an enemy. Today, the big brands use, the rappers, just do it by Michael Jordan. It's a bit ridiculous how I'm new, I'm different is taken. The slogans typically for Nike or things like that. This is a condition we all live in, which many artists, they surf on. I'm not talking moralistically, I'm talking about a real condition about media. Alibaba, we're always a bit on the verge of criticizing but also be part of the system. And all the heroes of art bought back by the system very quickly. This is true. How can you be true in this condition? I don't know what this means. Sincere, let's say. One could say that as soon as something is communicated, even the most sincere things become somehow insincere because of communication. This is true also for the issue of sustainability in the world and what we could call greenwashing. Architects today employ the most important thing, which is environmental problem, as a device, and in a way we sell, I could say, green indulgences as we need a new Martin Luther who rebels against the selling of green indulgences, I think, today, because it's a very big matter. It's not religion is bad, it's the political use of religion. Nature is totally okay, it's the political view of nature. Okay. Saying that, in a way, do we have to take in account for the corruption of ideas? Let me make an example. When the European modern movement was taken to America, Philip Johnson with Miss Van der Rohe made an exposition that was called The International Style. If you would use the word style, for Breuer, they would rebel, because they presented themselves not as a style, but as a method. When the case study houses were also quite performing by Craig Elwood and the Eames, but in a way, going from Europe to America, the modern movement became style. in a way against its own premises. When we did the Strada Novissima, you quoted Aldo Rossi and Portoghesi, the postmodernism became in a way also a style, no? Or you see, when he was young, I never liked particularly Daniel Libeskind, I don't know if he's hearing me, but he was a very intellectual, writing very complex things. Now he's one of the most commercial, I think, figures around, with his own figures, you know. This is true for many singers, you know, this idea. And engagement, we are the world, we are the children. Is that a good song? I don't know, okay? So the issue is, okay, you are, you know, saving the world, but is it meaningful for your own discipline? I'm not saying you should stay and just making a good song, okay? I think, but this is true for, you know, political music, political film, things is political. And I shut up here. So, the question is, the degradation of ideas is a natural process, some kind of entropy of sincereness. Think of the word resilience. The word resilience is a fantastic word that we are starting to resent because we cannot stand anymore it because of a repetition. Everything repeated too much time, it loses its meaning, and this is true also for journalism. When you do something, are you responsible for the degradation of your idea? And do you need to simplify your idea because your public is a bit stupid, they can also get something, talking about the public? Are you talking to the, you know, the intellectuals, or do you want to become a professor in, you know, an American Ivy League thing by your intellectual statement, or you want to talk to the big public with the families, with the little kids, say, oh, this is where we're going to live tomorrow, because that's what the Micro Triennale was, to go there and choosing the bedroom for the new style.
Yeah, because can you, is it this word?
Sorry. Just keep the power as a chef tree.
No, because maybe because I'm also very much related to information design and to quantities and you know, to give a scale to things. But while you were talking, what came to my mind is also, and also what Erika was saying about you know, how often do we need biennales to happen? How often do we want to, I mean, how much time do we need to expand and explore and investigate new topics and new ideas? I think if not, the problem is not about consuming ideas or for ideas to become commercial or to be commercialized. The problem is how much the system needs biennales to happen, exhibitions to happen, Salone Mobile to happen, and you know, all the fairs. Because for me and for my studio and for my profession, of course, these are special moments, are lucky moments in which we can explore things in a different way, from a different perspective, and I'm not judging here. But at the same time, we can notice there are maybe too many moments in which you know, we don't have enough time to explore the subjects in a meaningful way, in a way that can be also, that can have an impact or some consequences. And you were also saying, Martina, more or less the same thing. So on how to react
to specific urgencies,
Yeah.
also how to at the time to focus those urgencies, and then also the urgencies to who belong. There we go with this idea of the national, yeah, because how geopolitics is constructed is between two national states which have an identity. But with many things left out. So it's about majority. So, and then we go back to border, which is this liminal space where potentially there are possibilities to look at from the perspective of other disciplines to who is left outside the system. And then we go back to Alibaba in a way. It's not interested necessarily the system, what is part of it and what is left outside, and then how it's appropriated. And then we go to the appropriation of ideas. So I think we can look a lot theoretically about applying theoretical discourses on do we like the beauty or the good? Do the beauty you want to own it and you go to capitalism, the good you want to embed it, and then it's potentially what is best. But I think it's hard to respond to through theory to those questions because indeed, what is the beauty of responsive design, responsive architecture is somehow the reality that they create. And then we go also what Javier said at the beginning of Manifesta, how it integrates potentially the city and when it is successful or not. I think the module of the Biennale is questionable under many points of view from the market that it represents, from the precarity in a way of in terms of time and also in terms of what does it mean to participate as a studio to this module. It's about temporary appropriation of ideas, it's about long processes, projects that then don't have necessarily even the time or the space. Maybe from one of the pavilions you can make another Biennale, right? I think also the question of how approachable are those projects, and then we go back to the display of the format. How much can you learn by visiting in the short term? And then you go back to the public. Yeah, so please.
I will start from this point just to Erika to show us a little bit more the Russian pavilion, because I think she can just talk a little bit more about this topic on how a display can be also a starting point to share some knowledge and so this. And after Erika did for this exhibition, since they received the special mention, and then we can share some thoughts also with the public if someone has some questions. After the Erika presentation, and then we can, I think, close with some final thoughts from each of you, and then we'll see.
And there will be some slides that go in the back. And I am actually happy that this question comes at this point, because I hope you can also interject some of the provocations that just came up. So the Russian pavilion this year is titled Open. It was curated by curator Priscilla Parelli, Giacomo Ardesi, myself, and 3 other Russian curators, Vladimir Madiev, Lisa Dorel, and Masha Nazonova. And even if it's boring to list all these names, I think it's important to do it because crediting everyone is part of a political act, so to say, even if symbolic, even if small, that goes into the direction of undoing what traditional cultural institutions do. So I'm just mentioning it because I think, just now I will jump a little bit, but if we are talking about more engaged cultural institutions, and if ideas are inevitably corrupted because the market inevitably absorbs them, perhaps we can try to make exhibitions more political, not just looking at the level of the content, but looking at the level of the mechanics that bring exhibitions to life. So crediting everyone perhaps is a little gesture that goes in this direction. So as I mentioned previously, we decided already 2 years ago that the focus of our project, our curatorial project, would have been the pavilion itself. Because, as I mentioned before, we thought that some of the flaws that the biennial as a system has, that the biennial as an infrastructure has, have some repercussions on the value of a national pavilion, and we thought that the only way for us to engage in a meaningful conversation was by addressing those flaws first. So we looked at the pavilion as the object of our analysis, and we tried to unpack the pavilion in all its facets, in all its formats, and we tried to question them and to investigate each of them. The first one was the architecture of the pavilion. So 2 years ago, the building itself of the Russian pavilion here in Giardini was almost falling apart, and it needed some intervention. And this intervention in the architecture itself, that was actually renovated, was for us the prompt to investigate, question, and reform and restore, symbolically saying, also the institution that the pavilion represents. So the pavilion was renovated in its architecture, and the renovation was carried out by a Russian-Japanese studio called Casa Architects, which was not nominated, but that won an open call. And this, again, maybe like a tiny detail, but that for us was very relevant. So rather than replicating the traditional system of a nomination, that of course is very top-down, we thought that an open call would have allowed for new visions to emerge. And in fact, that was the case, because the duo that won the open call won the open call because they proposed a project that was opening up the pavilion in its architecture, but also the institution that architecture embodies, to all the environments that are outside of the pavilion. So rather than considering the pavilion a enclosed box, the architecture of the pavilion was renovated in the direction of opening it up to the lagoon and also to the rest of Giardini. And in that sense, the Russian pavilion is quite strategically located because it's really placed at the border between Giardini and the rest of the lagoon. So by opening new windows, by opening new doors, by restoring the terrace that had been closed for many, many years, it was possible to reopen the connections and to repair the kind of like broken links between the pavilion and the ecosystems around it. So the architecture of the pavilion was renovated. That was the first dimension that we investigated. And then there was a second one, which was the institution that the architecture embodies. So we tried to engage scholars, thinkers, practitioners from Russia and beyond into conversations around what the role and the social significance of cultural institutions should be in 2021. And of course, these conversations touched upon certain topics that have emerged today. So we launched this question and we commissioned a series of 30 texts that were written by different authors in Russia and outside of Russia, which have reflected on what new cultural institutions, new meaningful institutions would be. And I think one of the most valuable aspects of this project that then crystallized into the book that you see there, entitled Voices Towards Other Institutions, is that the perspective that we got were really different. Some people thought that social kitchens would be the ideal cultural institutions of today. Other people talked about underground clubs. And so the spectrum and the scope of the diversity of these answers, I guess, it's a token of the thirst for renewal and newness that somehow it's felt today in this world regarding the role of cultural institutions. And then there is a third dimension. So if there is the pavilion as the architecture and the pavilion as an institution, there was a third dimension which we investigated, which was that of the digital pavilion, that's how we call it, which was a necessary answer to the fact that for 1 year we couldn't really fulfill the role that we hope we could have fulfilled as a locus of aggregation, as a locus that could provide an act of solidarity for all the people working in the pavilion. For 1 year we couldn't meet, apart from through the mediation of a screen, and we still didn't want to somehow neglect or leave outside all the communities that had gathered around the pavilion until then, including the architect, but also including all the designers and artists that we had involved until then. So we decided to migrate online. This is something that happened around February 2020. And it was a long and quite elaborated process because, of course, thinking about an architecture as an activator and then having to translate this intention online is not an easy process. We migrated online and we launched an editorial platform which is still available, is the website of the pavilion, where we publish content very diverse, from musical playlists to podcasts to video games to text on a weekly basis. And for us, the weekly temporality was a very intentional choice because we thought that this rhythm, this pace, was one that would still allow for some kind of reciprocity and for some kind of reception from the other side. So before we were talking about who are our audiences, before Elisa was mentioned, do we have time to even absorb all the content that is out there? And we decided to migrate online. We were very aware of this issue and we tried to find a sort of a escamotage to still be present while not be overwhelming by releasing content on a weekly basis. So these three dimensions together, the architecture, the institution and the digital pavilion, somehow clicked in this triangulation to compose the project of Open. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think it was interesting just hear the description of the cultural theme directly since we are very about. So I think we have only 5 minutes. So if you would like to say very quickly the last thing, the last thought about this our debate, you are free to do it.
I can start maybe because I'm still the one who was just visiting the Biennale, and I thought that also Erika, what you addressed, interesting issue of these national pavilions. Somehow for me it's also part of the attraction of the Venice Biennale. There are now Biennales everywhere, but this is quite specific of the Venice Biennale. And what I really find attractive of the Giardini, that you have the central pavilion, which I think this year really sets out very clearly, let's say, the theme, and then you have the national pavilions who, not all of them, but I think those who go into a very localized issue, I think are very interesting and really add something. But then if I say that, yeah, maybe we should get rid of that they only belong to a certain number of nations with a certain history to the Biennale. And I had to think, in Brasilia, the famous plan of Lucia Costa, there are 20 ministry buildings designed by Niemeyer, very simple because every building is identical, but because every Brazilian government, they change the name of the ministries. So there's also a system of lettering that you can easily take off the facade, and then every 3 or 4 years, or whenever there's a new government, you put on the new name. Maybe that could be done with the pavilions, the name Russia disappears and it becomes, I don't know, South India, and that it changes every Biennale, so that then really the whole world is involved and can address these localized issues. But I would keep the pavilions.
So anyone else would like to? No? Okay, so I think we have to close. And I'd like to say thank you again to Abdel for this interesting talk. And so I give the floor to.
Thank you very much everyone for your participation today. I think the conversation could go on and it will go on tonight outside this room. I'm going to be very short because we are running out of time. I just want to announce that next time we're going back home. We're going back to Delft in 2 weeks. We will have another BK Talks. This time we will be talking about participatory producing housing and the fabrication of the city. It's the second BK Talks of the series together that we are organizing together with the management of the building environment department at the faculty. Also, and speaking of exhibitions, we will also open the second exhibition in the new exhibition space that we have just built in Delft. The exhibition is called Together, and it has to do with new modes of fabricating collective housing and